What were the biggest changes recording-wise from the first to the second CD?
I think really the biggest changes from the first to the second CD is that with the first CD it was very much a conventional recording. I recorded like most other people recorded. I had a multi-track recorder and I would play, for example, maybe on one track I would have drums. And so I'd record a drum track, I'd rewind, then I'd play a bass track, and along with the first track of drums, and then hear it back, listen to it, make sure it's okay, rewind it, and then go on to a guitar part on another track, and so on and so on. Very much then, after I had all that done, then I would add some solos here or there. You know, this kind of just little licks and things like that. And it's the way that recording has been done for a very, very, very long time. You know, multi-track recording. And sure, it works, and it works very well. And I think from a production value of what I learned in recording that first album was great. However, for the second CD, it really didn't work for me at all. I mean, that's just not the way that it was intended to be, at least for me. You have to remember I was improvising at the time. And I just felt that this looping aspect and approach to guitar was really unusual in the fact that everything was improvised, and I thought, gosh, you know, all the rules that I'd learned as far as multi-track recording just went out the window. And instead, because I was improvising and was so happy with the sound that I got when I was playing live, you know, with no overdubs, is that I just tried to recapture that sound in recording. And the way that I did that is forget overdubs. We're not going to do that at all. It's going to be a live recording. And so instead I just set up, you know, 4 tracks on the multi-track recorder and let them record. And 2 of the tracks were for really more of the loops and those types of things. And 2 of the tracks were the live guitar, and they were mic cabinets. And really, I've done every album since the second one that way. Okay, a live recording with no overdubs. Now, granted, it was a little more risky because you could make mistakes and that type of thing. But really, I found that to capture the magical moments that I would get while improvising, which I didn't get when I was, you know, rehearsing a part and then putting the track down, rewinding and listening to it, trying to come up with a track that would sound good and trying to make it perfect and that kind of thing. I just didn't get those magical moments that really seldom happen with that type of recording. Whereas when it was live, no overdubs or anything, just boom, what you hear on the recording is really the way that it sounds in the studio. And as a result, it would capture those magical moments that really happen by chance.
What things did you learn from the first CD that helped you on the second as far as recording and producing?
Really, I think that the things that I did learn from my first CD, recording-wise, specifically, was certainly miking guitar cabinets rather than going direct, which really, you lose a lot of the guitar sound that way, you know, especially when I was using tube amps and those types of things. And I really wanted to get the sound that was coming out of the speaker, you know, rather than a line out. So certainly miking cabinets, I learned a lot about that. And also phasing of the microphones, if you're using 2 microphones to capture a stereo signal and that kind of thing. I also learned about mixing, you know, just very much, you know, how loud should the drums be compared to the guitars and so on.
What were some of the things that you learned about recording and producing in this process?
Things I learned in the recording process of the second CD is that because it was live, if I set the levels beforehand so that it would capture the live sound, right, there was enough headroom that I didn't need to mix the channels, right, because they were already set. In other words, they're all at the same volume. So it's really the equivalent of having, one microphone, sticking it in the room, and picking up the sound. I mean, that's really, so it's a much simpler approach, but at the same time, I got a lot better sound quality as well, because my production skills as far as mixing and so on were okay after the first album, which is where I learned really. However, to get the right kind of mix throughout in a live performance, it's best not to touch the faders at all, and rather concentrate on recording the performance, which is what I did.
On your first CD, you had some help mastering. Did you have any help on the second CD?
Yes, mastering. Where that is after it's recorded, then you want to clean it up and bring up the levels and make sure that it's EQ'd correctly and so on. And with my first CD, Mark Hood over at Echo Park certainly helped with that. With my second CD, what I discovered is that mastering is really a subjective kind of thing. It's not this is mastered correctly, this is mastered incorrectly for the most part. It's really a preference, and it's very expensive to have someone master your material, so I certainly wanted to learn to do that. What I did with the second CD though is I took the material that I had recorded and I sent it to people to master it, in fact. And Chris Hadding, my own guitar teacher, was one of the people who mastered the second CD. And when I got it back, I discovered that the mastering was done very well by Chris, certainly. But it's just not quite what I had envisioned and what I had heard when I was recording it. And I discovered that really, other than myself, really there weren't too many people who saw or heard the same things that I did, as far as the way I wanted the CD to be as far as mastering goes. So I did end up begin to then master my own material, and the second CD was the first time that I had done that. Now I did get some help certainly from Chris Hadding, and also from the people in Canada who actually produced the CD, and they mastered it further to bring up the levels, which I hadn't quite gotten the hang of, but I had gotten a pretty good idea of what I wanted.
Now the cover was very artistic. Who created that?
Yes, the cover. This time around for my second CD, I really didn't really have a cover, and I didn't have my friend to rely on. He hadn't created any images really. So I was really on my own at that point, and the way that cover came about is actually what it is. It's just a still photo of my guitar, in fact, sitting on a guitar stand. And I remember I was working with a software program, and I, put the photo in the computer, I scanned it in, brought it into the software program, and it had some plugins, and one of them was this plugin that was really kind of a neon type plugin, and I messed around with that program, And all of a sudden, when I saw what it did to that photo, I said, that's it. That should be the album cover, you know. And certainly, as far as the name really to continue a theme, I thought, boy, that really does look like an alien guitar. I mean, if I had to imagine an alien guitar, that certainly would be it. Just the way that almost looks like the pickups are on fire, or you know, this electricity running through the guitar and so on. And so there, when I saw it, I knew that that had to be the album cover, and so I certainly worked with it a little bit more. And I look back on it now, and I really like that image. And I think it certainly fits, you know, with the album title, which is Modern Rock Guitar Volume 2, Alien Guitar. And I think the cover certainly looks like an alien guitar.
You told me before that the CD was created in Canada. Do you have a U.S. version as well?
Yes, I also have a U.S. version as well. Really, the way that came about is it was recorded just in my home studio in Bloomington, Indiana. I also mixed and mastered it. I then sent the production master to Canada. There were a couple reasons for this. One is I had a deadline that I wanted to meet, and it certainly had to do with the Grammy Awards. And you know, to enter a CD for consideration in the Grammy Awards, it has to be done within a certain amount of time. And while I had the CD completed, I didn't have it manufactured yet. And I called, in fact, a lot of places in the United States, and they said, no, I'm sorry, we're all backed up, we don't have time, we couldn't get it done, produced in that amount of time. Well, it turns out that I found these people who were really great, and they said, no problem, send it over, and we will have those CDs done. Now, there really is a Canadian and a US version, and the way that came about is that the manufacturers in Canada, what they did is they created a small number of CDRs, and they had already printed the covers for all the CDs, okay? But for a small number, they actually used a CDR that had the image that would be on the regular CD as well, on the disc itself, and they would package that and shrink wrap it, with the actual cover. And so I got a small number of those, and then after meeting the deadline, I went back and actually had actual CDs made, which were the US version then. So the Canadian version, there are very few of those around, but if you look closely, it's actually a CDR rather than a CD. Though it's very hard to tell because the covers are the same, but you can tell certainly in the shrink wrap quality as well. Kind of interesting. I worked with those people again for my next album, my third album as well. So they've been really great, very helpful. I think the only thing that I saved money, I guess, compared to having it made in the U.S., but by the time you ship it here, it really ends up being about the same financially. But well worth it. I'm really pleased with that CD.
And on the Canadian version, do you sing the Canadian national anthem?
Oh, Canada.